And we'll switch gears here a little bit, I guess fittingly after lunch, to nutrition-related topics for the next two presentations. The first of which will be a tag team show between Professor John Cant and Dave Innes, a postdoc with John, both working in animal biosciences. And they will tell us about some of their work on the future of, potential future of precision feeding for dairy cows. Gentlemen, the floor is yours.
Thanks a lot. Thank you, Stephen. So they tell me after lunch people tend to drift off and fall asleep, and so I asked the staff here to lower the temperature in the room, keep everybody awake. So thanks for the invitation to talk about precision feeding. And so to start off this talk, actually I sent an email to Laura Wright at the Dairy Research Center here to say, can you send me the latest ration that you guys have formulated for your lactating cows? And so I just wanted to illustrate kind of the process of formulating a ration. You're probably quite familiar with it, but you put inputs in there as to what days of milk your animal is, what level of milk production, and the composition of the milk, and the body weight of the cow, and stuff like that. And basically we take this information on the performance and description of the ingredients that we have available to us, stuff about the cows, and we use a model to predict what the requirements of the animal are and formulate a diet in this direction. And the model that gets used to figure out what the requirements are could be something like the NRC model, which has just been updated, and we've got a new edition that came out a couple of years ago. This is a 500-page book, but it also comes with a computer program that will do the requirement calculation for you. But another thing that these kind of models do, so it's not just the NRC, or I guess we call it NASM now, this kind of a model is prevalent throughout the industry. So there's AMTS, there's the Cornell model, which AMTS is a front to, and NDS, and various in-house models that nutritionists will use. And the modern way of this kind of modeling is that they can go in the other direction, which is where you describe the diet, you give the formulation of the diet and the composition of the ingredients that are in there and some description of the animal, and you can predict what the performance of the animal is. So it's moving in the opposite direction, and it's more like how a cow operates. So the model is like a virtual cow. It's a cow on the computer. And so it will behave, as far as nutrient flows are concerned, like a cow. And so this forward prediction, that I call it, of the performance lets you do other things besides a least cost ration formulation. You could optimize the performance with a model that goes in this particular direction. And just to illustrate kind of the difference, I formulated a least cost ration and was able to, from that, predict with a model what the performance of the animal actually would be on this least cost ration. And so, of course, if you know what ingredients are there and the prices of the ingredients, you can say, here's the feed cost, here's the milk value that you get, and this is the income over the feed cost that you would get. And then I formulated an optimum performance ration. So it's different in its nutrient and ingredient profile, but it's for the same set of requirements. I fed it into the model at the same level of dry matter intake, 25.6 kilos a day, just sort of representing an average animal in mid-lactation. And you can see that you've got a different feed cost. It's a higher feed cost, but the income over feed cost is also higher. So if you're formulating a ration for least cost, you may not get the maximum performance that you're desiring. And so in this case, on performance, I'm talking income over feed cost. But there are a lot of other ways you could evaluate or consider the performance of the animal besides that. And so here is like a general description of how a cow is going to respond to an increase in the level of a particular nutrient, like starch or protein in the diet, or we can consider it also, this graph, as representing changing an ingredient, like soybean meal or corn or something like that. But the point I want to make is that the income over feed cost, so your performance indicator in this case, is going to have a curvilinear kind of shape, and the model can predict that whole response. Okay, so it's not just predicting a particular point to say, here's the requirement. It's telling you if you feed different levels of the nutrient that you're going to get different kind of responses in income over feed cost. And from that, you can declare, here's an optimum level to have the maximum income over feed cost, and this is the nutrient level or ingredient level that should be in the diet. And if you were to look at your, say, 5 different cows that are in the herd that's being fed a single TMR, so they're all getting the same nutrient profile, they're all getting the same ration, but they may be eating different amounts of it, and you might find that you're going to get different performance from the different animals. You know, they're different genetics, they're at different stages of lactation, different parities, undergoing different physiological kind of stresses or circumstances within their bodies. And so you're going to have different income over feed costs for each animal that's all on the same diet. And not only are these particular points going to be different performance, but how they respond to the nutrients is going to be different. Some of them might be on the downswing of their response curve, and if you increase the nutrient level, that they're actually going to have worse income over feed cost, and some may be on the upswing of it, and if you increase the nutrient level, it's beneficial in terms of performance. So really, each individual animal, we can declare a different optimum for each one of them. And so this individual variation is what we're trying to account for in precision feeding, and that's what we refer to with precision feeding. So now what I want to do is introduce my partner in crime here, Dave Ennis, who did his PhD in Australia in nutrition, but he's a very good computer programmer and data handler, and you're going to see evidence of that here as I hand it over. So, Dave Ennis.
Yeah, thanks, John, and it's great to be here and be able to share some of these figures with you. So, talking about income over feed cost, did I go the wrong way? There we go. There's 55,000 income over feed costs. And what this is data that we were able to pull from the Ontario Dairy Research Centre in Elora. And each point is an individual cow's income over feed cost, with a few assumptions, mind you, but it's across since about 2021. So what we were able to do is, instead of looking at one average income over feed cost, we just set some prices from today. So we're comparing the price currently, so it's not super accurate if you're an economist, but it gives you a really good idea of the variation that you could expect in income over feed cost. And actually the variation seems to be higher at the start of lactation, and in some ways if you plot raw milk yield data, you'll see a pretty similar sort of plot. So I just thought, okay, well, let's just look at a couple and we'll pull out some of the mess, and I just drew a line in there to see, you can draw your eye towards where each cow is. And these particular cows had the most data in the data set in the same lactation, so it's a good way to look at it. And we can see at the start of lactation there that there's quite a difference in income over feed for each of these individual cows. I just want to go back to the data, and this is what's really exciting about our facility and then the resources that we have, is we can actually pull enough information to make these calculations. And firstly, to get the milk revenue, we need to know pretty frequent measurements of fat and protein and in the milk. We can set a milk check price just based on some recent numbers. And then we also obviously need to know the yield. So that's relatively easy, but then we need to know what she was eating. To get each of those points, we have to have an intake. And we're lucky that we have a lot of these automatic feed intake bins, and we can get how much each cow is eating on a day. And then they also are recording exactly what diets are being prepared and given to each pen every day. And we can access all of this information. And so we know every day what exact diet was given to a pen, we know which cows were in the pen, and we know how much that they ate because the feed bins are recording it. And that allows us to get those income over feed costs. I want to give you a little look at what the portal is that we use. Actually, don't even have to go to the farm. So Lucas Alcantara at the He's the research data manager. One of his jobs was putting this together, and I can log on, I can go, I want 3 years of data and download it in a couple of minutes. And to give you an idea, if I was looking at feed intake, if I was looking at the raw feed intake data from those bins, it's measuring every individual event. There's 8.4 million entries there that you'd have to sift through. So there's a lot of this data that we are collecting, and it's really, really great that we're able to get it on this portal. But I want to, part of our job is to clean it, and that's a whole other story. So we've spent a fair bit of time cleaning this data that we can make sense of it. I want to look instead now at a data set that was collected in more of an experiment. This was done by Patty in her master's, and she's a PhD student now in our lab. She's working on this project as well. But these are some of the data sources that she was able to pull together just for 29 cows for about a month, I think. And so because it was collated a little more hands-on, we trust it fairly well that it's pretty clean. And if we look at the milk yield data straight up, this is probably not that surprising. You say you have an average milk yield of 36 kilograms, then you see that actually the individual cow milk yield across that month was quite different. And you could say, okay, well, there are different stages of their lactation. There's a whole range of reasons why that might be different, but yet we still feed them, particularly in smaller farms. We can only make one ration. We're feeding one ration to all of these cows. So what's really great about this data set too is that we know what they were getting fed, and we have these consistent daily measurements, and we're able to use a model to talk about like what John was. So another one of our students, Braden, he's got a poster here actually. That's kind of, the poster is a snapshot of how it all started. He was interested in calculating some energy requirements, and now he's basically rewritten the whole model into Python, which is a really great resource for us because now we can use that to run these models really quickly. And this is also online. So this is our GitHub page, which means that we're storing all of the code there. At the moment, actually, it's public. And the idea is for it to be open source. We're sharing all the code, and we hope that people will contribute to it as well. So I'm going to show you some plots like this. The zero line this is comparing what the model predicted, like what John was talking about. If we take the diet information and the information about the cow, then the model will make a prediction. It took me about 30 seconds to run 780 simulations. And so that's just the data that we had for that month. So it's very fast for us to run this model. If you had to do that before, actually we made Braden do this first. He did about 80 of them. It took him hours just using a software program to run the predictions. I think that's maybe why he decided to write the code, so it was much faster. So the model in half of these cases is predicting milk yield to be higher than what we actually measured it to be. And then there's another set of the data where it's under-predicting. And we see that again, like it's pretty common to see this variation across the fat and the protein as well. And in this case, actually, it was seeming to be predicting lower than what it really was. But all of this variation presents to us a really interesting opportunity where we have a facility where we can measure these things. So we can really start to investigate some of these different ideas about, now that we can measure this variation and we can run these predictions, there's a lot of things that we could try and do with that information. Another great thing is that because Braden has gone to the effort of putting all this code in a way that is really reusable, we were pretty quickly able to write a user interface for it. And right now I'm using this user interface online where students in dairy nutrition are using it to model rations, and we can really customize the output so that we can focus our attention just on the things that we're interested in teaching them right now. But in the background, it's exporting many, many of those outputs that you would get from the full model. So the full model is running every time they change the diet in the background. So it's a really good resource to have it in a format like that. The other thing that Patty did was use the green feed system to measure methane production. I knew we'd be talking about methane, so I guess it's good to show that that's a measurement that was taken. And you can see the variation again between these animals. And that's a picture of how it works. I think many of you have probably heard of it before, but basically it's measuring the gas, or as the cow is breathing, eating a pellet inside that little chamber, it's measuring the gas exchange. And what is actually really interesting with this is we can use it to also measure oxygen and carbon dioxide. So this gives us a snapshot of what's going on in the cow, because if you think about when you eat energy, or if the cow is eating energy, that energy needs to go somewhere. And if it's getting burnt and used, then we can measure that in the carbon dioxide coming out. So we can use some calculations to estimate what was the portion of the energy that was being used by the cow and what was the portion of the energy that she was retaining. So we see that the model was predicting that the cows were burning more or using more energy than perhaps what they really were. And the flip side of that is that if you look at the energy balance of the cow, that's something we talk about a lot. It's the amount of, if a cow is consuming energy and there's more energy coming out in the milk, then we have a negative energy balance. But we can predict the energy balance and measure it, and that's another way that we can start to compare this model. So this presents an opportunity where we can have individual models. If we start changing the model now, we could try and get these to not be the wrong prediction. We could try and change for every single cow. We could have a model where we start to push the prediction closer, and then we have a copy of a model for every cow. Okay, I'm going to give it back to John to try and make sense of all that.
Yeah, that's great. So the whole idea of having a different, you can have a virtual cow with a model. You could have a different virtual cow. So there's a counterpart for every cow that's in the herd that you're making these measurements on. You have a virtual copy of the cow in the model. So if we focus in on the model part of this, then you can play around using the model as if it was the cows in the herd. And so you can try different diet formulations just with the virtual cow until you've got the level of performance that you find best. And by you, I guess I mean, there are different, as a manager of a farm, you've got different goals maybe that you are trying to accomplish. And so that can get programmed into the software itself as to what it's trying to optimize. So is it solely income over feed cost? Are you trying to combine some various measures together? And so this is actually an active area of research of what if you're trying to optimize income over feed cost and greenhouse gas production at the same time? You might think they're mutually opposed to each other, but that's not necessarily the case. And there are ways then that we've got to design that you can optimize multiple targets. And so in the model then is where you have all your individual response curves that I was talking about being theoretically. And if I want to show another sort of flow diagram of where we're going with this precision feeding idea is, first of all, collecting data off the cows automatically, remotely. They're in free stalls. And so you're able to get all these numbers, characteristics of the cows and their performance and their intake and so on. And of course, there's a lot of data processing that has to happen, first of all, when things come in. And so thanks to people like Dave and Lucas Alcantara that are setting this up for us, there's a lot of processing that's happening automatically. And then there's the modeling aspect of things that comes into play. And then as a result of that, so an optimum sort of formulation has been developed from the modeling, then you can automate the delivery of the ration or of the supplements to a PMR that they're being fed, but you can optimize the supplementation of each individual animal back into the individual feeders. And at this stage, what we're using is the feeder that's part of the green feed system that's measuring the respiratory gases and the methane. So this is a project that we've been working on for a couple years. The first part has been all around the data analytics side of things and getting computer code to be able to handle the massive amounts of data that come in from our world-class awesome research station that's just down the road here. And we are eventually getting to the point of testing out the precision feeding strategy at the research station. So to summarize, like a take-home message kind of thing, is precision feeding itself is an attempt to account for individual variability that you have within a herd. And it involves this process of automated sensing of the performance of these free-moving animals, create a virtual copy of the animal inside the computer, running simulations in that computer, which Dave has told us can be very fast, and then automating the delivery back to the animals. And there have been a bunch of people that have worked on this project so far that I would like to acknowledge. There's funding that has come mostly from Food from Thought and OMAFRA. But the people, people have said this already today, but the reputation of the university would be nothing without the students. Like, it's all about the students that make us, we take the credit for it and make us seem famous. And so I've mentioned Lucas, or we have mentioned Lucas at the Dairy Research Center. You know, Laura Wright's been incredibly helpful, and without the help of Jeff McFarland and Joe Parkinson, it wouldn't have happened either, so I really want to acknowledge them. Patty Konjerski and Braden Figuth have been mentioned, but there are a bunch of other students in here as well, like Carolina Reyes and Linnea Pott, that were involved in this. And Lena Vanderhout came over from Wageningen to help out on some of the data collection that Dave showed, and she's a student with Jan Dijkstra at Wageningen, so we continue to collaborate with that group over there. And then I've got some collaborators from the department, like Vern Osborne and Jen Ellis, Tom Wright, and so thank you. I'll take questions.
Thanks, Sean. Thanks, David. Questions?
Are you looking to have the amount of the supplement, the ingredients of the supplement change as well with this, or you're talking still PMR and the supplement and the amount of pieces are always so far?
Yeah, so what will happen with optimizing the diet is you optimize the diet for each individual animal, and then you got to figure out of that diet what part of it is constant across all the different animals, and that's the PMR. And then there's a supplement that will go in smaller amounts per animal. And then that's going to be a mixture of 4 different things, you know, to make an individualized supplement for each cow. So things like protein sources and soluble carbohydrate sources and that kind of thing. So that's how we envision it, and this is part of what we've got to work out the kinks on, is how do you do that?
Others?
So for your multi-objective programming, how are you calculating the greenhouse gas, particularly the enteric methane part of that?
Yeah, good question. So we have, so far, we've modified the NRC model to give us CO2 outputs. And then that CO2 is like based on, you know, like Wollen's stoichiometry. And so far, then that's our method of predicting methane. But we haven't tested anything on that. And actually, Braden was just asking me about it, and I said, you got to go talk to the experts, like Jen Ellis, for example, or you, for example, of, okay, what is the best way to get a methane prediction? But the nice thing about it is, even if your prediction is not very good, you're making an observation. So you can always adjust how you predict. And so that's really what happens in here, is we're imagining you redo this every week. So you're reformulating every week for the cow, and they will change. Like an animal that's, you know, say the orange one that's there at this moment in time, that animal could morph as she moves along through lactation. That yellow curve could morph to be like the blue one, you know, so the optimum's always changing where she is. And the model is always adapting, being reparametized to the individual. So if your methane prediction is off, like say Dave showed there in a slide, you adjust the model parameters so that now the methane prediction is not off. And so you're always adapting the parameter values. It's never a constant.
Yeah, no, my question was more like you were thinking about individual cows, but thinking about being more practical if we're applying this in the field. Can we work with smaller groups that are more similar between each other?
So that's another, yeah, you totally can. And so this is a strategy. We're not the only ones working on this kind of stuff. There are a bunch of people. And so that is one angle that people are taking, is could you group like animals together in terms of they need a similar supplement, so you put them all together. Like say even here, you could probably get groups of animals here. Maybe 2 or 3 different supplements would cover the range of optima that exist, you know, within a group.
Thank you, John. Thank you, David.